Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was born in 1090 in Fontaine-les-Déjà, France. He came from a noble family, being the third of 7 children. His father, Tessalin, was a knight, and his mother, Aleph, was a deeply religious woman who greatly influenced Bernard's spiritual formation. From an early age, Bernard showed inclinations toward the spiritual life, cultivating a deep devotion to the Virgin Mary, something that would remain central throughout his life. Bernard's childhood was marked by an education focused on Christian faith and moral values, primarily imparted by his mother. This family environment prepared him for a religious life. After his mother's death when he was 17, Bernard began to seriously consider the monastic vocation, influenced by his mother's piety and the Christian atmosphere in which he was raised. From a young age, Bernard received a solid and Christian education, which included not only religious teachings but also a broad cultural formation, common among the nobles of his time. He studied literature, rhetoric, and sacred texts, developing a sharp mind and a heart devoted to God. His studies included Latin, the language of the Church, which allowed him to read the scriptures and the writings of the Church Fathers with great depth. This intellectual and spiritual formation prepared Bernard for monastic life and the leadership role he would later assume. His deep understanding of the scriptures and the Church's teachings was fundamental to his later influence, both within the Cistercian Order and in the Church as a whole. The solid foundation of his education was one of the reasons he stood out as one of the great theologians and mystics of the Church. Bernard's vocation for the religious life was awakened in an intense and undeniable way. After his mother's death, he felt an increasingly strong call to dedicate himself entirely to God. The maternal loss, instead of driving him away from God, deepened his faith and his desire to pursue monastic life. He saw the religious life as a way to follow Christ's footsteps in a more radical and total way. At the age of 22, Bernard made the decision to join the Cistercian Order, a choice that shocked his family and friends, but which he considered a natural response to the divine call he felt in his heart. His entry into religious life was not just a personal choice, but a true abandonment of the world in search of union with God, which would come to inspire many others to follow the same path. In 1112, Bernard entered the Abbey of Citeaux, founded by Saint Robert of Molsemy. He was accompanied by 30 relatives and friends who were inspired by his example and decided to follow the same path. This decision was a milestone in his life and also in the history of the Cistercian Order, as the arrival of Bernard and his companions brought new vigor to Cistercian monasticism. Bernard quickly stood out in the monastic community for his discipline, piety, and spiritual fervor. The simplicity and austerity of Cistercian life, which included manual labor and constant prayer, were practices that Bernard embraced with enthusiasm. His zeal for monastic life contributed to the growth and revitalization of the order, which would become one of the most influential in the Middle Ages. In 1115, Saint Bernard was tasked with founding a new monastery in an isolated valley, which he named Clairvaux. The foundation of Clairvaux was a huge challenge, as the site was inhospitable and required much work to be transformed into a monastery. However, under Bernard's leadership, the monastery not only prospered but also became one of the most important spiritual centers of medieval Europe. The monastery of Clairvaux quickly attracted new monks, and its reputation spread throughout Europe. The discipline and intense spiritual life practiced at Clairvaux served as a model for other Cistercian monasteries. Clairvaux became a symbol of Bernard's monastic ideal, where the search for God was carried out through prayer, work, and community life in an atmosphere of austerity and simplicity. Life at the monastery of Clairvaux was marked by a rigorous routine of prayer, manual labor, and study. Bernard established an environment of silence and contemplation, where the monks could devote themselves entirely to God. The daily routine began early, with long hours of prayer and meditation, followed by work in the monastery's fields and workshops, reflecting the Cistercian vision of ora et labora, pray and work. Bernard emphasized the importance of humility and obedience within the monastic community. He believed that monastic life should reflect Christ's life, characterized by simplicity and detachment from worldly goods. Under his leadership, Clairvaux became a living example of this spirituality, attracting people from all over Europe who sought to experience this radical form of Christian life. As abbot, Saint Bernard was a charismatic and demanding leader, guiding his community with firmness and compassion. He had a unique ability to inspire the monks to lead lives of holiness, balancing discipline with mercy. Bernard was known for his pastoral care and dedication to the spiritual and physical well-being of the monks under his responsibility. His leadership extended beyond the walls of Clairvaux. Saint Bernard exerted significant influence throughout the Cistercian Order, helping to found dozens of other monasteries and spreading the Cistercian ideal across Europe. His vision of a monastic life deeply rooted in prayer and manual labor shaped Cistercian spirituality and left a lasting legacy in the Church. Saint Bernard was a prolific writer, and his writings are considered treasures of Christian spirituality. He wrote numerous sermons, letters, theological treatises, and hymns, addressing themes such as the love of God, monastic life, Marian devotion, and church reform. His texts are marked by deep spirituality and eloquence that captivated both his contemporaries and later generations. Among his most famous works are the Sermons on the Song of Songs, in which Bernard explores the mystical love between the soul and God. These writings testify to his profound spiritual experience and his ability to communicate theological truths in an accessible and touching manner. His words continue to inspire and guide Christians around the world. Saint Bernard's spirituality was characterized by an unceasing search for God and a deep experience of divine love. He believed that the love of God was the ultimate goal of Christian life and that all actions should be oriented toward this end. For Bernard, the spiritual life was a journey of love, where the Christian drew closer to God through prayer, meditation, and sacrifice. Saint Bernard also highlighted the importance of humility as an essential virtue for drawing near to God. He saw humility as the path to true wisdom and union with God. The depth of his spiritual life made him a guide for many who sought a deeper life of prayer and contemplation, and his spiritual legacy remains strong today. Saint Bernard had an extraordinary devotion to the Virgin Mary, whom he considered the mediator between God and humanity. He saw Mary as the perfect example of obedience and humility, virtues that he sought to imitate in his own life and encourage in others. His devotion to Our Lady was reflected in his sermons and writings, where he frequently exalted her purity and role in the plan of salvation. One of the most memorable moments of his Marian devotion was the composition of the prayer Remember, O Most Gracious Virgin Mary, Memorare, which expresses total trust in the intercession of the Virgin Mary. Bernard firmly believed that all the faithful could turn to Mary in their needs and that she would respond with mercy. His devotion to Our Lady profoundly influenced Marian spirituality in the Church. Saint Bernard's theology was centered on love, which he considered the essence of God and the fundamental principle of Christian life. For Bernard, God's love for us required a response of total and unconditional love. He taught that love for God should be selfless, free from any desire for reward, and that the Christian should seek to love God for himself, not for the gifts he bestows. Saint Bernard also saw love of neighbor as an extension of love for God. He believed that love for others was a way of manifesting God's love in the world. His theology of love deeply influenced Christian spirituality, particularly regarding charity and community life. Bernard saw monastic life as a space where this love could be lived out more fully and authentically. Saint Bernard played a crucial role in the reform of the Cistercian Order, which sought to return to the more austere and rigorous practices of early monasticism. He believed that monastic life should be a true imitation of Christ, marked by simplicity, poverty, and obedience. Bernard worked tirelessly to reform Cistercian monasteries, promoting a more rigorous and devout life. Under his influence, the Cistercian order grew rapidly, and many new monasteries were founded following the ideals he promoted. The Cistercian reform led by Saint Bernard not only revitalized the order but also had a significant impact on monastic life throughout Europe. His vision of a monastic life centered on prayer, work, and discipline continues to be a model for monks today. Due to his wisdom and holiness, Saint Bernard was often called upon to act as an advisor to popes and other church leaders. His reputation as a man of God and great spiritual discernment led him to play important roles in various ecclesiastical matters. He was consulted on theological, political, and moral issues, becoming an influential voice in the church of his time. One of the popes most influenced by Saint Bernard was Pope Eugenius III, who was one of Bernard's disciples at Clairvaux before being elected pope. Bernard guided Eugenius in many important decisions, especially related to church reform and the promotion of monastic life. His influence on church matters shows how His Holiness transcended the walls of the monastery and impacted all of Christendom. In addition to his spiritual influence, Saint Bernard also had a significant impact on the development of canon law. He was consulted in various legal disputes within the Church and helped formulate responses based on Christian doctrine and tradition. His wisdom in legal matters and his ability to apply theological principles to practical situations made him a respected figure in the ecclesiastical legal field. Bernard was known for his ability to resolve complex conflicts within the Church, always seeking justice and fidelity to the gospel. His contributions helped shape the development of canon law in the Middle Ages, and his principles are still studied and respected in the Church's legal circles. He demonstrated that holiness was not separate from the practical and legal matters of church life. Saint Bernard was a tireless defender of the Catholic faith, especially in times of controversy and heresy. He stood out as a fervent defender of orthodoxy, combating doctrinal errors and defending the truth of the faith. Bernard was known for his ability to argue with clarity and charity, always seeking to convert heretics and bring those who had strayed back to the fold of the Church. One of the most notable cases of his defense of the faith was his opposition to the philosopher Peter Abelard, whose ideas were seen as a threat to Christian doctrine. Bernard confronted Abelard in public debates, defending the faith with firmness and a spirit of Christian charity. His defense of orthodoxy made him one of the greatest champions of the Catholic faith of his time, protecting the integrity of church doctrine. Saint Bernard played a central role in the calling and promotion of the Second Crusade in 1146, at the request of Pope Eugenius III. He saw the crusade as a way to defend Christendom against Muslim invasions and as an opportunity for Christians to atone for their sins through military service. Bernard traveled throughout Europe, preaching the crusade and encouraging nobles and peasants to join the cause. Although the Second Crusade was a military failure, Saint Bernard's participation demonstrated his deep concern for the defense of the Christian faith and the protection of holy places. He was deeply disappointed by the outcome of the crusade but accepted the defeat with humility, seeing it as a test of God's will. The crusade, though not achieving its goals, showed Bernard's influence in mobilizing Christendom for a common cause. Despite his holiness, Saint Bernard was not immune to conflicts and controversies. His zeal for the purity of the faith and monastic life led him to confront several important figures of his time, including theologians, bishops, and even other monks. His debates with Peter Abelard are an example of how Bernard did not hesitate to enter into controversy when he believed the faith was at risk. Bernard also faced criticism within the Cistercian Order itself, where some of his reforms were seen as excessively rigorous. However, he always maintained his position firmly, convinced that he was following God's will. The conflicts he faced were, in many cases, a test of his dedication to truth and holiness, even when it meant confronting others. Despite his great influence and success, Saint Bernard was deeply humble and never sought recognition or power. He saw his position as abbot and spiritual leader as a service to God and the Church, and always sought to maintain a spirit of humility in all his actions. Bernard believed that true greatness lay in humility and that power and fame were traps that could divert the Christian from his true purpose. This humility manifested itself in his daily life at the monastery, where he lived as a simple monk, sharing the same work and difficulties as his brothers. Even when called upon to deal with important church matters, he never let this interfere with his life of prayer and contemplation. Saint Bernard's humility is one of the most admired aspects of his spirituality. Saint Bernard had contact with several saints and important religious figures of his time, and his interactions with them showed the depth of his spiritual life and his influence in the Church. One of his closest friends was Saint Norbert of Xanten, founder of the Premonstratensian Order, with whom he shared a passion for monastic life reform and combating heresies. Another notable example is Saint Malachy of Armagh, an Irish archbishop who visited Clairvaux and became a great friend of Bernard. Saint Malachy passed away at the Clairvaux monastery, and Bernard wrote a hagiography in his honor. These relationships show how Saint Bernard was deeply connected with other spiritual figures of his time and how he was a source of inspiration and support for many saints. Throughout his life and after his death, many miracles were attributed to Saint Bernard's intercession. He was known for miraculous healings and his ability to perform exorcisms. Accounts of people being healed through his intercession spread throughout Europe, increasing his fame as a man of God endowed with extraordinary powers. Among the most well-known miracles is the healing of a blind man who regained his sight after Bernard made the sign of the cross over his eyes. These miracles contributed to the growth of devotion to Saint Bernard and strengthened his reputation as one of the great saints of the Church. The accounts of miracles were fundamental to his canonization, showing that his holiness was recognized not only through his actions and teachings but also by extraordinary signs. Prayer and contemplation were the heart of Saint Bernard's life. He believed that union with God was primarily achieved through continuous prayer and meditation on divine mysteries. For Bernard, prayer was not just a religious practice but an expression of deep and personal love for God. He encouraged his monks to dedicate a large part of their time to silent prayer and contemplation, always seeking to be in God's presence. Bernard also wrote about the different degrees of prayer, from vocal prayer to the highest form of mystical contemplation, where the soul experiences union with God in a profound and intimate way. His own life of prayer was marked by a spiritual intensity that inspired those around him. Bernard's constant prayer and his ability to enter into deep communion with God are central aspects of his holiness. Community life was a fundamental element of Saint Bernard's spirituality. He believed that monastic life should be lived in community, where the monks could support each other in the pursuit of holiness. For Bernard, the community was a reflection of the communion of saints in heaven and a means of spiritual growth through fraternal love, obedience, and mutual service. At Clairvaux, Bernard established a community united by love for God and the desire to follow Christ's teachings. He emphasized the importance of community discipline, charity, and sharing. Community life under his leadership was marked by a deep sense of unity and common purpose. This vision of monastic community profoundly influenced the development of Cistercian monasticism and left a lasting legacy. Saint Bernard's writings had a lasting impact on Christian literature. His sermons, letters, and treatises are considered classics of Christian spirituality and continue to be read and studied today. The depth of his spirituality and the beauty of his language made his writings a source of inspiration for many writers and theologians over the centuries. Moreover, Bernard's influence on literature goes beyond his own writings. His example of life and his theology of love inspired many other works of spirituality and mysticism in the Middle Ages and beyond. Later Christian literature was marked by a strong Bernardine influence, especially regarding Marian devotion, monastic life, and the mystical experience of divine love. Saint Bernard is considered one of the greatest mystics of the Church. His spiritual life was deeply marked by the mystical experience of God's love. He described the relationship between the soul and God as a spousal union, where the Christian is called to unite with Christ in a profound and transformative love. This mystical experience was the center of Bernard's spiritual life and profoundly influenced his theology and preaching. Saint Bernard's mysticism was not a search for extraordinary experiences but a deep living of faith in God's love in the daily life of monasticism. He believed that all Christians were called to this mystical union with God, primarily achieved through prayer and contemplation. His life as a mystic and contemplative continues to be a model for those who seek a deeper spiritual life. Saint Bernard's philosophy was deeply rooted in the Christian faith and the tradition of the Church Fathers. He saw philosophy as a tool to deepen the understanding of faith, but always subordinated to divine revelation. Bernard criticized the excessive rationalism of some of his contemporaries, such as Peter Abelard, arguing that reason must be guided by faith and that God's mysteries are beyond human comprehension. Saint Bernard advocated a philosophy based on love and humility, where the knowledge of God was achieved more by the heart than the mind. His philosophy was a quest for divine wisdom, understood as knowledge leading to union with God. This vision profoundly influenced Christian spirituality, emphasizing the primacy of love over intellect in the search for God. Saint Bernard had a deep reverence for the Eucharist, which he saw as the center of Christian life. He taught that the Eucharist was the sacrament of God's love, where Christ gives himself to the faithful in a full and real way. For Bernard, the celebration of the Eucharist was a moment of deep communion with Christ, which nourished the soul and united it to God in a unique way. He also emphasized the importance of spiritual preparation for receiving the Eucharist, seeing it as a sacred encounter with Christ. Bernard encouraged Christians to approach the Eucharist with a pure and loving heart, recognizing Christ's real presence in the sacrament. His teachings on the Eucharist helped strengthen Eucharistic devotion in the Church and continue to be a source of inspiration for the faithful. In the last years of his life, Saint Bernard continued to serve as abbot of Clairvaux and to influence the Church, despite his declining health. He suffered from various illnesses but maintained his spiritual activity and commitment to church reform until the end. Even in poor health, Bernard continued to write, preach, and advise, showing his unwavering dedication to his vocation. In his later years, he was increasingly recognized as a holy figure and a spiritual advisor of great wisdom. Although his health deteriorated, his influence continued to grow, and he remained a central figure in the Church until his death in 1153. Bernard died surrounded by his monks, leaving a legacy of holiness, wisdom, and love for God that continues to inspire the Church. Saint Bernard died on August 20th, 1153, at the age of 63, in the monastery of Clairvaux. His death was deeply felt not only by his monastic community but also by the entire Church. He was buried in the monastery he founded, and his tomb became a place of pilgrimage for many who sought to honor his memory and ask for his intercession. The legacy of Saint Bernard is vast and enduring. He left a profound impact on monastic life, theology, Christian spirituality, and the Church as a whole. His example of holiness, wisdom, and writings continue to inspire and guide the faithful today. Saint Bernard is remembered as one of the great saints of the Church, a doctor of the faith, and a model of love for God and neighbor. Saint Bernard was canonized on January 18, 1174, less than 21 years after his death, by Pope Alexander III. His canonization was an official recognition of his holiness and his lasting impact on the Church. Bernard was recognized not only for his miracles but also for his exemplary life and his profound influence on Christian spirituality. The canonization of Saint Bernard marked the beginning of an official devotion that quickly spread throughout the Church. His feast day is celebrated on August 20th, and he continues to be invoked as an intercessor by many faithful around the world. Bernard's rapid canonization reflects the deep respect and admiration he earned during his life and after his death. In 1830, Pope Pius VIII conferred the title of Doctor of the Church on Saint Bernard in recognition of his extraordinary contribution to theology and Christian spirituality. This title is given to saints whose teachings are considered especially important for the doctrine and life of the Church. Bernard's writings and spirituality had a lasting influence and continue to be studied and appreciated by theologians and the faithful. As a doctor of the Church, Saint Bernard is recognized as one of the great masters of the Christian faith. His teachings on the love of God, monastic life, Marian devotion, and the Eucharist continue to be a source of inspiration and guidance for the Church. The title of Doctor of the Church is a confirmation of the enduring value of his spiritual and theological legacy. Popular devotion to Saint Bernard spread rapidly after his death and remains strong to this day. He is invoked as a protector against temptations, especially those of a sexual nature, and as an intercessor in times of need. The prayer "Remember, O Most Gracious Virgin Mary," attributed to Saint Bernard, has become one of the most popular Marian prayers among Catholics. Moreover, Saint Bernard is revered in many places as the patron of churches, monasteries, and religious communities. His example of monastic life, his devotion to Our Lady, and his humility continue to inspire many of the faithful. Popular devotion to Saint Bernard is a testimony to his holiness and his ability to touch the hearts of Christians in all ages. Saint Bernard is traditionally considered the patron of beekeepers and candlemakers. Bernard's association with bees and honey comes from his nickname Dr. Mellifluous, due to the sweetness and eloquence of his sermons and writings. Honey, like Bernard's words, was seen as something that nourishes and sweetens, symbolizing the divine wisdom he imparted. Moreover, the Cistercian Order, to which Bernard belonged, was known for its practice of beekeeping, which reinforced this association. Saint Bernard is invoked by beekeepers to protect their hives and bees, and his patronage is celebrated by those who work with honey and beeswax, elements so present in Christian life and liturgy. Saint Bernard's legacy continues to influence the modern Church, especially regarding monastic life, spirituality, and Marian devotion. His works are still studied in seminaries and universities, and his teachings on the love of God and the spiritual life are widely respected. Bernard's influence is also evident in how many Cistercian and Trappist monasteries continue to live according to his principles. Moreover, the spirituality centered on love and humility promoted by Saint Bernard resonates deeply with the spiritual needs of the modern world. His example of life, marked by devotion to God and service to others, offers a model for Christians today who seek to live their faith authentically and profoundly. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was one of the great saints of the Church, whose life and teachings left an indelible mark on the history of Christianity. His devotion, wisdom, and holiness continue to inspire the faithful around the world. As an abbot, theologian, and mystic, he shaped Christian spirituality in profound and lasting ways, offering a living example of love for God and neighbor. May his legacy continue to guide and inspire the Church in the centuries to come. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and share this video with someone who, like you, seeks to live holiness every day. God bless you. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, pray for us.